JSON Story Part. Dr. Tevin Keel stood in the middle of the laboratory, staring at the latest batch of clones with all the enthusiasm of a man forced to attend his own execution. The Monastery of Ebon Reflection, a name that conjured images of serene meditation and soul-searching, was in reality a breeding ground for the type of experimentation that would make Frankenstein blush. Beneath its vaulted ceilings and faux sacred aura, human minds were at work on things that would make the universe shiver. /n/n well, aren't you a handsome devil? Tevin muttered, tapping the side of one of the glass tubes with a disdainful finger. Inside floated a bleak copy of himself, looking as if he'd been dipped in a vat of apathy and left to marinate. If you're my legacy, I may as well pack it in now. /n/n the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, a rhythm out of place in the otherwise sterile hum of machinery. Marin Driscoll, humanity's finest, or at least most recently available, envoy had arrived for her diplomatic mission, completely in the dark about the monastery's true nature. /n/n the door hissed open, and Marin stepped in, looking around like a tourist who'd just discovered the museum was actually a mortuary. Nice digs. Really captures that church chic, minus the incense. Or is that what I smell? /n/n Tevin snorted, flicking a switch on a console that dimmed the lights over the cloning pods. Welcome to the Temple of Faux Enlightenment, MS Driscoll. How was your trip? /n/no, delightful. If your idea of delightful is being crammed into a tin can with 100 other sweaty souls, all pretending that space travel is glamorous. Did you know the SS? Conundrum serves a daily special, that's just recycled protein paste. I think I tasted yesterday's disappointment in it. /n/n Tevin chuckled, scratching his chin. Sounds like you got the 5-star treatment. I hope you're ready for your mission. The Xynarch are a touch peculiar. /n/n peculiar's good, keeps things interesting. Last time I dealt with Peculiar, I ended up negotiating peace between two tribes who'd been at war over the rights to a crater that turned out to be a giant latrine. So Peculiar's my forte. /n/n the joys of diplomacy. Where every problem is a hole in the ground waiting to be filled, Tevin replied, half grinning, as he led Marin through a side door into a corridor lined with ancient-looking tapestries. The Xynarch have invited humanity to participate in a negotiation simulation. They think it might help foster understanding. Because nothing screams mutual respect like a good VR game, right? /n/n Marin shrugged, her eyes flicking over the alien motifs woven into the fabric. Hey, if they want us to play diplomat in a digital sandbox, who am I to argue? I've been told my avatar's quite the charmer. /n/n eyes, well, just remember. In this simulation, you might actually get to choose your dialogue options, Tevin said, pushing open another set of doors to reveal a cavernous chamber filled with Xynarch technology that hummed ominously. Unlike real life, where every choice just feels like a slower form of suicide, /n/n Marin stepped into the room, her attention caught by the central console, a swirling mass of holograms and projections that seemed to defy the laws of sanity. That's a lot of lights. I think I just had a seizure. So how does this work? /n/n Tevin gestured to a seat before the console, gesturing like a carnival barker introducing the next big attraction. You sit there, strap in, and prepare to become one with the Xynarch's idea of diplomacy. Just remember, whatever bizarre scenarios they throw at you, try not to blow up the universe. /n Marin smirked, lowering herself into the chair with the nonchalance of someone who'd faced down angry mobs, and worse, angry bureaucrats. I'll do my best, but I can't promise I won't accidentally declare war on a toaster. I've got a history with tech. /n Tevin shook his head, watching as Marin donned the headset, the room's lighting dimming as the simulation booted up. If it's any consolation, our last envoy did that. Toast was a mess for weeks. /n Marin laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the vastness of the chamber. I'll keep that in mind. All right, let's see what these Xynarch have cooked up. Worst case, I make a fool of myself in front of an audience of alien diplomats. /n as the simulation began, Marin found herself immersed in a digital approximation of the Xynarch homeworld, its sky a disorienting shade of purple, its flora decidedly carnivorous-looking. Her avatar, a slightly more polished version of herself, complete with a diplomatic suit that didn't look like it had been slept in, stood in the middle of what appeared to be a conference hall. /n well, at least I clean up nice, she muttered to herself, surveying the room with the kind of bemused detachment that only a seasoned diplomat could muster. Xynarch avatars, all tentacles and inscrutable expressions, were seated around a table whose surface flickered with images of various galaxies. /n the lead Xynarch, a particularly gaudy specimen with tentacles that shimmered like oil on water, addressed her in a voice like gravel being ground underfoot. Human envoy Marin Driscoll, welcome to the simulation. We trust you will find our scenarios illuminating. /N/N Marin grinned, folding her avatar's arms across its chest. Illuminating, confusing, what's the difference? Let's get started, shall we? I've got a schedule to keep and a universe to not blow up. /N/N as the first scenario unfolded, a dispute over interstellar trade routes with implications as tangled as a cat's cradle. Marin found herself navigating the digital minefield with all the finesse of a diplomat used to dealing with beings who had more eyes than faces. /N/N back in the real world, Tevin watched the console's display with a mixture of amusement. The Xynarch were unpredictable, and Marin's success was far from guaranteed. But if anyone could handle their brand of chaos, it was her. /N/N or she'd crash and burn spectacularly, Tevin mused aloud, rubbing his temples. Still, makes for good story either way. /N/N as the simulation continued, Marin's avatar deftly sidestepped traps of logic and rhetoric, her real-world experience translating surprisingly well into the virtual arena. Her humor, sharp as a razor, disarmed the Xynarch, who seemed taken aback by her willingness to laugh in the face of absurdity. /N/N your approach is unorthodox, the lead Xynarch noted, its tone a complex mix of curiosity and what could almost be amusement. /N/N unorthodox is just a fancy word for interesting, Marin replied, dodging a particularly thorny question about territorial expansion with a joke that left the Xynarch's tentacles twitching. Look, we might be from different sides of the galaxy, but at the end of the day, we're all just trying to find a way to get along without setting everything on fire. /N/N and the Xynarch exchanged glances, or whatever the tentacled equivalent was, and the scenario shifted, presenting Marin with a fresh set of challenges, each more convoluted than the last. Yet she rose to meet them, her diplomatic instincts honed to a fine edge, her sarcasm an unexpected weapon against the alien logic. /N/N in the control room, Tevin tapped a finger against his chin, impressed despite himself. It was a precarious dance, this simulation, and Marin was masterfully avoiding stepping on any tentacles, figuratively at least. /N/N but as the simulation ratcheted up the stakes, introducing elements of political intrigue and potential treachery, Marin's expression became more serious, her focus narrowing. Here was where the real test lay, in the murk of intergalactic politics, where every word could be misconstrued, every gesture misinterpreted. /N/N all right, Driscoll, she muttered, her avatar pausing to consider its next move. Time to show them why humans are the galaxy's most unpredictable species. /N/N with a deftness born of years in the diplomatic trenches, Marin navigated the scenario's complexities, her choices reflecting a blend of pragmatism and principle that was uniquely human. Xynarch, for all their intellect, seemed genuinely engaged, their digital expressions hinting at a grudging respect. /N/N your strategies are intriguing, the lead Xynarch said, its tone almost approving as the simulation drew to a close. /N/N Marin smiled, leaning back in her simulated chair. We humans like to keep things interesting. You never know what's going to happen next. Keeps you on your toes or tentacles, as the case may be. /N/N as the simulation ended, a soft chiming sound signaled the return to reality, and Marin removed the headset, blinking in the sudden light of the control room. Tevin was waiting, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. /N/N so, did we avoid galactic catastrophe, she asked, stretching as the simulation's effects wore off. /N/N barely, Tevin replied, handing her a bottle of water. But I think you impressed the Xynarch. They seem to think humans might not be a total waste of galactic space. /N/N high praise indeed, Marin quipped, taking a swig of water. Well, if nothing else, I managed to keep us out of an interstellar incident for another day. Must be my lucky outfit. /N/N Tevin chuckled, patting her on the shoulder. Let's hope your luck holds. Something tells me this was just the opening act. /N Marin nodded, a flicker of anticipation in her eyes. The Xynarch had been a challenge, but a rewarding one, and as she left the control room, she couldn't help but wonder what other surprises the universe had in store. One thing was for certain, she'd be ready to face them, sarcasm and all. Title: Breaking the Simulation, Humanity's Unpredictable Diplomacy HFY Sci-Fi Story. In the simulation of the Xynarch's homeworld, Marin Driscoll's avatar stood at the center of a room that could only be described as an architect's fever dream, where angles defied geometry and the decor made a mockery of good taste. The walls were a chaotic swirl of colors that suggested the designer had either extraordinary vision or an unhealthy relationship with hallucinogens. The Xynarch, with their tentacles that seemed to have a mind of their own, sat around a crystalline table that flickered with images of star systems and trade routes. Marin's avatar, far more polished than her real-world self, managed to keep a diplomatic poker face, though she couldn't help but feel like the joke was entirely on her. "Ah, Ambassador Rilnix," she began, addressing the lead Xynarch, whose expression resembled that of a cat perpetually unsure whether it's found a snack or a threat. "I see we're diving right into the deep end of interstellar logistics. Hope you brought your floaties." Rilnix's tentacles paused in their restless dance, a pause that could mean anything from mild interest to plotting her untimely demise. "The parameters of this simulation are designed to reflect the intricacies of galactic diplomacy," it stated, voice like marbles rolling down a gravel path. "Intricacies, huh?" Marin's avatar leaned forward, feigning interest. "Well, you know what they say, diplomacy's just war by other means, except with more paperwork." The Xynarch exchanged a look that, for all Marin knew, was the alien equivalent of a collective eye roll. The simulation, ever eager to please its audience, shifted the terrain beneath her virtual feet. A galaxy map bloomed on the table, and the stakes of this peculiar game became clear. The first scenario was a classic, a dispute over a wormhole that connected two strategic star systems. Whoever controlled it controlled the flow of goods, information, and presumably a fair amount of contraband, because why else would anyone care so much about a cosmic shortcut? "Your task, human envoy," Rilnix intoned, "is to navigate the complexities of this negotiation without resorting to hostilities." Translation: "Keep your species' explosive tendencies in check," Marin quipped, her fingers tapping the virtual table. "Got it. Let's see how this plays out." The Xynarch avatars that looked like a child's attempt at drawing an octopus from memory, each seemed invested in the unfolding drama. Marin's strategy was simple: mimic the insanity of the simulation's logic until it tied itself into a noose and promptly hung itself. She opened with a basic proposal, offering the Xynarch access to human trade networks in exchange for shared control of the wormhole, a move that was both generous and disarmingly naive. The Xynarch, predictably, countered with demands so complex they could have been drafted by an intergalactic lawyer with a fetish for fine print. "Ah, the old let's see if the human gets lost in the details trick," Marin said, smiling as her avatar projected confidence it didn't entirely feel. "I like it. Here's my counter." Her avatar proposed a neutral zone, a buffer space that neither party controlled entirely. To sweeten the pot, she added a couple of human technological advancements, less critical, more impressive sounding. It was the diplomatic equivalent of selling snake oil, and the Xynarch knew it. The simulation trembled, recalibrating for the unexpected gambit. Marin could almost hear the gears grinding in the virtual machine, struggling to adapt to the unpredictability of human negotiation tactics. Rilnix's tentacles twitched, a sure sign of either irritation or deep thought, possibly both. Intriguing. "Such a proposal suggests unconventional thinking. Unconventional thinking is what humans are best at," Marin replied, her avatar reclining with practiced ease. "We're all about making it up as we go along." The Xynarch seemed to digest her words, parsing them through whatever alien logic filters they employed. Marin watched them, her real-world self indulging in a sip of a virtual drink that tasted suspiciously like real alcohol. Maybe the programmers had a sense of humor after all. As the negotiation teetered on the brink of an agreement, Marin noticed a flaw, a tiny oversight in the simulation's assumptions. The Xynarch had calculated every possible outcome, but had overlooked one very human element: empathy. "Let's cut to the heart of the matter, Rilnix," she said, a new edge to her voice. "You want control, we want access. But at the end of the day, what both sides really want is stability. No one benefits from chaos, right?" The room fell silent, a pause heavy with implication. Marin's avatar maintained its composure, though she felt her heart rate spike. This was the kind of gamble that could either end in a diplomatic breakthrough or an all-out interstellar incident. Rilnix's expression shifted, a subtle change that might have been the alien equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "Stability is desirable," it conceded, tentacles resuming their idle dance. "Your perspective is intriguing." Marin grinned, every bit the diplomat who just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. "Glad we could see eye to eye, figuratively speaking, of course." The simulation, perhaps surprised by this unexpected turn of events, reevaluated its parameters. The wormhole dispute, once a potential flashpoint for conflict, now seemed a promising avenue for cooperation. With both parties having agreed, however tentatively, to explore the idea of a neutral zone, the scenario wound to a close. Well, that wasn't so bad, Marin muttered, her avatar rising to its feet as the Xynarch filtered out, their curiosity sated for the moment. At least no one died of boredom. Back in the real world, the headset lifted off, and Marin blinked her way back to reality. Tevin stood by, his expression a mix of surprise and amusement. You didn't blow anything up, he observed, handing her another water bottle. I'm genuinely impressed, Marin chuckled, taking a grateful sip. Guess I should thank my lucky stars or whatever cosmic entity decided to spare us today. How'd I do? Better than expected, Tevin replied, leaning against the console with a casual air. The Xynarch seemed intrigued, which is about the highest compliment you're likely to get from a species that thinks emotional outbursts are a sign of mental instability. High praise indeed, Marin said, smirking. So what's next on the agenda? More simulations, or do I get a break before my brain turns to mush? Tevin laughed, a dry sound that echoed in the chamber. Consider this your coffee break. You'll need it for the next round of Xynarch logic puzzles. Marin groaned, stretching her arms as she prepared for another dive into the digital abyss. Fantastic. Just when I thought I'd made peace with my own sanity. As she settled back into the seat, ready to face whatever the Xynarch had concocted next, Marin couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of it all. Here she was, a human envoy trying to navigate a labyrinth of alien diplomacy without losing her mind or her sense of humor. The simulation whirred to life once more, and Marin's avatar was thrust into a new and equally convoluted scenario. This time, it was a crisis of resources, with rival factions vying for control of a rare mineral essential to both economies. The Xynarch avatars circled like sharks, eager to see how their human counterpart would handle this fresh challenge. Marin's avatar tapped its fingers thoughtfully on the crystalline table, a gesture mirrored by its real-world operator. All right, let's see what fresh hell this is, she muttered under her breath, knowing full well that the Xynarch's idea of negotiation involved more twisting paths than a paranoid's conspiracy board. One of the Xynarch, a particularly menacing-looking blob with eyes that seemed to focus on everything and nothing at once, took the lead. Human envoy, your task is to mediate a dispute over the rightful ownership of the Yttrium mines on the moon of Selser Prime. Selser Prime, huh, Marin said, her avatar adopting a wry smile. I hear it's lovely this time of year. Perfect for vacation if you enjoy fighting for your life. The Xynarch didn't react, though their tentacles clacked against the table in what Marin decided to interpret as mild annoyance. The Yttrium is of significant strategic value, the lead Xynarch continued, undeterred by Marin's sarcasm. Its control would ensure dominance over multiple sectors. Marin's avatar feigned contemplation, her mind racing through possible approaches. The Xynarch thrived on logic, but they'd underestimated her willingness to play dirty, figuratively of course. Okay, let's keep this simple, she declared, her avatar leaning forward with an earnestness that was only slightly feigned. We set up a joint operation. Equal shares, equal responsibilities. That way everyone gets a piece of the pie without turning it into a bloodbath. The Xynarch watched her, their silence punctuated by the humming of the simulation's machinery. It was a long, tense moment, as though the entire universe had paused to see if a tiny human could outwit a race of meticulous negotiators. Your proposition is intriguing, the lead Xynarch finally spoke, its voice carrying a hint of grudging respect. However, the governing authorities of the sectors involved may find it difficult to relinquish total control. Marin grinned, sensing an opening. That's the beauty of compromise, Rilnix. No one's ever completely happy, but at least no one ends up without a seat at the table. Besides, if there's one thing humans understand, it's the art of making do. Another pregnant pause followed, the Xynarch avatars exchanging glances. They seemed caught between their inherent wariness and the allure of an unexpectedly reasonable solution. The proposal shall be considered, the lead Xynarch conceded, its tentacles finally still. We acknowledge the pragmatism of your approach. Marin's avatar nodded, satisfaction written across its features. Glad to hear it. Now, if we're done here, I've got a galaxy's worth of bad coffee to consume. As the simulation faded, Marin emerged into the real world once more, her mind buzzing with the experience. She found Tevin waiting, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. How'd it go? He asked, arms crossed as he eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Well, let's just say I didn't set any new records for diplomatic disasters, Marin replied, taking the offered water bottle with a grateful nod. Though I might have just won a most likely to frustrate an alien species award, Tevin chuckled, shaking his head. You're doing great, Marin. The Xynarch are already talking about inviting humans to more simulations. Apparently we bring a certain unpredictability to the table. Unpredictability, huh? Marin reflected, a grin tugging at her lips. I guess that's one way to put it. Let's just hope it doesn't turn into a repeat of the Great Toaster War. As the two shared a laugh, Marin couldn't help but feel a surge of confidence. This might just be the beginning of a new era of diplomacy, one where humanity's chaotic charm could finally shine. And if she had her way, the galaxy was in for a lot more surprises. Marin's avatar blinked into existence amid a virtual representation, slightly more coherent than a fever dream. The terrain shifted underfoot like the stomach of someone who shouldn't have hit the buffet twice. Alien architecture twisted in ways that would make Escher's ghost weep, defying all human logic and physics, but she wasn't here for the scenery. Rilnix, who'd taken up the role of lead Xynarch like a fish to water, or rather, like a fish flopping desperately on a sun-baked rock, appeared before her. Its expression was a blend of curiosity and disdain that Marin was growing increasingly fond of. Fond in the same way one might appreciate a migraine for reminding you you're alive. "Human envoy," Rilnix began, its voice a purr mixed with the screech of metal dragging over stone. "We have yet another task for you. The neighboring sectors have refused our previous proposition, citing concerns over destabilization." Marin's avatar scratched its head, mimicking her real-world action. "I thought we were all about stability, Rilnix," she quipped, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Unless that's just a fancy way of saying we want it all and are willing to pretend otherwise." Rilnix's tentacles twitched in what might have been agreement or indigestion. "Your perspective remains unorthodox," it conceded. "Unorthodox is just a nice way of saying you don't understand us," Marin countered, folding her arms. "But hey, if it works, why fix it?" Meanwhile, back in the real world, Dr. Tevin Keel was elbow-deep in a different kind of mess. The Monastery of Ebon Reflection, with its serene facades and unnervingly quiet hallways, hid secrets darker than a black hole's armpit. Tevin was knee-deep in one such secret, and frankly, he wasn't too happy about it. He stared at the cloning pods, their glass tubes humming with an unsettling vitality. Only these particular tubes were not on his checklist. Unauthorized cloning activity screamed at him like a toddler on a sugar high. Someone had been busy, and it wasn't him. "Well, this is just peachy," he muttered to himself, running a hand through hair that hadn't seen a comb in days. His reflection in the glass looked back at him, as confused and slightly terrified as he felt. "I sure hope whoever's behind this got the memo about cloning ethics." "Oh wait, this is Ebon Reflection. We left those at the door." Tevin tapped a few buttons on his console, pulling up records that told a tale darker than any bedtime story. The data suggested a deeper manipulation by the Xynarch, a puppet master act that could only end in tears and possibly intergalactic war. Great, just what he needed, a galactic civil war on a Monday morning. Back in the simulation, Marin was busy turning logic on its head, or at least giving it a solid concussion. The Xynarch had proposed a complex trade agreement that involved enough red tape to hogtie a planet. Marin, on the other hand, saw a Gordian knot and opted for a metaphorical sword. "Why don't we just hear me out, simplify this," she suggested, her tone carrying the practiced ease of a con artist selling desert property to a fish. "You take half, we take half. Everyone plays nice. We even throw in a potluck, and no one has to pretend they enjoy the Xynarch equivalent of potato salad." The lead Xynarch blinked, slowly, deliberately, as if trying to process a joke without a punchline. "Your proposal lacks nuance," it managed, sounding as though it were admitting to a personal failing. "Who needs nuance when you've got common sense?" Marin said, her avatar leaning back with the kind of confidence that only comes from balancing on the knife edge of oblivion. "We keep it simple, you keep it diplomatic. And I don't have to spend my next simulation untangling a bureaucratic nightmare." The Xynarch were silent, a rare occurrence that Marin didn't take lightly. It was as though they'd been handed a Rubik's Cube and told it was a grenade. "Your methods continue to defy expectation," Rilnix finally said, a tentacle idly tracing an indecipherable pattern in the air. "Story of my life," Marin said, flashing a grin that could cut through titanium. "So, are we gonna dance this dance, or do we need another round of diplomacy bingo?" As Marin's unconventional diplomacy started garnering attention, both in simulation and reality, Tevin was knee-deep in conspiracy theories and unauthorized projects. Something told him the Xynarch were more than just interested parties. They were pulling strings hard enough to make a marionette blush. He considered his options. Going to Marin with this would either spur her into action or land them both in hot water. Still, Tevin had always preferred action, especially when it promised to shake the status quo like a snow globe. As Marin exited yet another simulation, her mind a whirlpool of half-baked ideas and caffeine withdrawals, Tevin met her with a look that promised anything but a quiet evening. "What's up, Doc?" Marin asked, tossing the headset aside and reaching for yet another water bottle. "You look like you've seen a ghost, or worse, a Xynarch at a charity event." Tevin snorted, a sound that was half amusement, half exasperation. "I've found something," he said, sliding a data pad across the table. "Unauthorized cloning, And before you ask, no, it's not supposed to be happening. Marin picked up the pad, her eyes scanning the information with the speed of someone accustomed to reading between the lines. Well, that's just great, she muttered, her expression shifting from surprise to a grim determination. Looks like our friends in the simulation have been playing us for fools. Seems that way, Tevin agreed, rubbing his temples. I'm getting the feeling these negotiations aren't just about diplomacy. They are a smokescreen. Marin nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. And if that's the case, then we're in deeper trouble than I thought. We need to figure out what their endgame is before they decide to make their move. With their course of action set, the pair plunged back into the labyrinth of alien diplomacy, determined to unravel the threads of manipulation that threatened to unravel everything they'd worked for. Marin's next foray into the simulation was no longer just about navigating the minefield of interstellar diplomacy. Now it was about unearthing the secrets buried under a mountain of alien deceit. If the Xynarch wanted a game of wits, they'd picked the wrong human to play against. As the simulation booted up, Marin's avatar found itself in a new scenario with stakes higher than ever. The Xynarch had upped their game, presenting a crisis that teetered on the brink of total chaos. Rival factions, resource shortages, potential war, each element carefully orchestrated to push the simulation to its limits. Welcome, human envoy, Rilnix began, its tone carefully neutral. You are tasked with resolving a dispute over the Yttrium mines, now complicated by a third party's intervention. Marin's avatar raised an eyebrow. Third parties, sounds like a party I wasn't invited to. What's next? Interpretive dance negotiations. Rilnix regarded her with the kind of patience reserved for someone trying to explain quantum mechanics to a toddler. The third party is a rogue faction, neither aligned with us nor your esteemed colleagues. Rogue faction, let me guess, the kind that doesn't RSVP to galactic summits, Marin quipped, already formulating a plan. All right, here's the deal. We bring them to the table, make them feel heard. Then we remind everyone that a three-way split might not be ideal, but it's better than a free-for-all. The Xynarch exchanged glances, an action so painfully human it almost made Marin laugh. Almost, because beneath the layers of humor and sarcasm was a tension that threatened to snap. If Marin couldn't figure out the Xynarch's endgame, they were all in for a world of hurt. Back in the real world, Tevin had set about gathering allies, or at least, gathering people who were less likely to stab him in the back. The monastery's corridors were rife with whispers, each one hinting at secrets deeper than the chasm they were all staring into. His research had uncovered traces of Xynarch involvement in projects far beyond simple cloning. Genetic manipulation, psychological warfare, AI integration, all pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture of Xynarch machinations stretching far beyond the diplomatic dance Marin was engaged in. As he worked, Tevin couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a prickling at the back of his neck that suggested all was not well in ebon reflection. He'd learned long ago to trust his instincts, and right now, they were screaming louder than the alarms he was about to set off. When Marin emerged from her latest dive into the simulation's tangled web, she found Tevin waiting with news that made the unauthorized cloning look like a minor faux pas. You've got that look again, Tevin, Marin said, taking a seat beside him. What you find? More skeletons in the closet. Worse, Tevin replied, sliding a new data pad her way. Turns out the Xynarch have been dipping their tentacles into more than just cloning. They've been manipulating genetic codes across the board. It's not just about creating life, it's about controlling it. Marin cursed under her breath, the weight of their discovery settling around her like a lead cloak. Well, that complicates things, she said, each word carefully measured. Guess we were right about the smoke screen. Any idea what they're planning? Tevin shook his head. Not yet, but whatever it is, they're playing the long game. It's not just about winning, it's about changing the rules entirely. Marin leaned back, her mind racing. Then it's time we played a little dirty, she said, a grin spreading across her face. If the Xynarch want a game of wits, we'll give them one. And this time, we'll make sure they can't see the cards we're holding. With their plan set, Marin and Tevin were ready to face whatever lay ahead. The Xynarch might have had centuries of planning and technological superiority on their side, but Marin was counting on something they'd never quite understood, the human capacity for chaos. As the simulation booted up once more, Marin's avatar stood ready, armed not just with logic, but with the kind of unpredictability that had become her hallmark. The Xynarch might have thought they'd mapped out every possible outcome, but they'd never accounted for one thing, Marin Driscoll's unique brand of diplomacy and the chaos it inspired. In the realm of galactic diplomacy, where every move was calculated and every outcome predicted, Marin was the wild card, and if she had any say in the matter, she was about to flip the entire deck. The simulation booted up with all the subtlety of a high-speed train crash. Marin's avatar stood in an environment that looked like a Picasso painting on acid, buildings defying gravity, colors bleeding into each other like a bad LSD trip. It was the Xynarch's idea of a diplomatic setting, where logic took a backseat to spectacle. "Good to see the decorators outdid themselves," she muttered, earning a nod from her virtual sidekick, a humanoid representation of a data analyst who had the personality of a dead fish but the loyalty of a Labrador. Rilnix appeared, its tentacles waving with the same level of enthusiasm a cat has for bath time. "Welcome back, human envoy. We have decided to introduce new challenges." "Great," Marin said, rolling her eyes with the kind of exaggerated flair that recommended her as a fine candidate for an interstellar drama club. "Let me guess you've added fire-breathing dragons into the mix." "Dragons are mythical, irrelevant creatures," Rilnix responded, eyes narrowing slightly. "We prefer chaos with a touch more subtlety." As if on cue, the simulation erupted into chaos. Factions shifted allegiances faster than a politician after an opinion poll. Resources vanished, territories morphed, and the rogue faction, the one Marin was supposed to bring to the table, had apparently decided the table was beneath them and opted for guerrilla warfare instead. "Wow, you guys really went nuts with the difficulty slider, huh?" Marin said, eyebrows rising as she surveyed the madness. "I'm guessing the goal is to make this as unwinnable as possible. We find challenge illuminates character," Rilnix replied smoothly, its tone suggesting Marin's character was about as illuminating as a burnt-out light bulb. Marin grinned, a predatory glint in her eyes. "Then it's a good thing I never play by the rules." Meanwhile, back in the less insane world of the Monastery of Ebon Reflection, Tevin was neck-deep in a cesspool of data files that reeked of conspiracy. If paranoia had a smell, it would be this, a combination of stale coffee and fear sweat. He sipped the former and indulged the latter, piecing together the Xynarch's plans like a puzzle made of knives. Genetic codes weren't just being manipulated, they were being rewritten, entire bloodlines altered with the ease of a child scribbling over a coloring book. "Turning us into their personal projects," Tevin muttered, realizing the Xynarch weren't just playing God, they were planning to become the Pantheon. He flagged the files, their contents pointing to an unsettling conclusion. The Xynarch didn't just want control. They wanted humanity to evolve in a direction more compliant. It was the kind of plan that made corporate takeovers look like lemonade stands. When Marin finally extracted herself from the simulation, hair disheveled, eyes blazing with the kind of manic energy usually reserved for mad scientists, Tevin was waiting. He looked like he'd been run over by a conspiracy theory. "You okay, Doc?" Marin asked, flopping into a chair like a marionette with cut strings. "You look like you found out the Tooth Fairy's running for office." "Worse," Tevin said, thrusting the data pad at her with the kind of urgency that suggested it might explode. "The Xynarch aren't just trying to negotiate. They're trying to rewrite our damn DNA." Marin blinked, processing the information with the speed of a supercomputer loaded with caffeine and spite. "Well, that's just fan-freaking-tastic," she groaned. "And here I was thinking they just wanted to throw a party with all the bureaucratic trimmings. Looks like they want to rewrite the guest list entirely," Tevin said, rubbing his temples, the headache pounding like a war drum. "So what's their endgame, turning us into good little Xynarch minions?" "Pretty much," Tevin said, grimacing. "They plan to start with the next generation, make humans more docile, easier to control." Marin snorted, the sound a mix of disbelief and derision. "Docile my ass, they haven't met my nieces. Those kids would give a rabid Wolverine a run for its money." Tevin chuckled despite himself. "Then maybe there's hope yet." "Hope's a dangerous game," Marin said, eyes narrowing. "But damn if it isn't worth playing." They hatched a plan, the kind born out of desperation and a refusal to bend the knee. If the Xynarch wanted a universe of compliant humans, they'd have to get through Marin first, and she was nothing if not a stubbornly unpredictable force of nature. Back in the simulation, Marin's avatar navigated the chaos with a reckless abandon that was equal parts strategy and insanity. Where others saw problems, she saw opportunities. Where others hesitated, she charged forward, a bull in a china shop where the china was all precariously balanced diplomacy. "Rilnix," she called out, her voice cutting through the noise like a laser through butter. "If we're going to solve this mess, we need to do it the old-fashioned way." The Xynarch leader appeared, appearing mildly curious, which was basically their version of shock and awe. "And what, may I ask, is the old-fashioned way?" Marin grinned, a smile that promised nothing but trouble, brute force and ignorance. "Turns out those are my specialties." Rilnix blinked slowly, as though trying to comprehend a joke told in a language it barely understood. "You propose we engage directly. Why not?" Marin said, shrugging. "Sometimes you gotta roll the dice and hope they come up sevens." The Xynarch hesitated, clearly not used to such reckless disregard for caution. "And if your plan fails, then I'll be the first to say I told you so," Marin replied with a wink. but something tells me you guys aren't used to playing this kind of game. With the stakes higher than a kite on prom night, Marin's actions in the simulation were unorthodox, bordering on the insane. She rallied the factions, negotiated with the rogue elements, and managed to instill a sense of urgency that had previously been missing. Chaos was her canvas, and she painted in broad, unpredictable strokes. Meanwhile, Tevin worked behind the scenes, gathering allies from the shadows of the monastery. There were more dissenters than he'd imagined, each one eager to throw a wrench in the Xynarch's grand designs. It seemed humanity's stubborn streak was alive and well, and ready to make a mess of things. The monastery became a hotbed of whispered conversations and hidden agendas, each step Tevin took echoing with the gravity of their situation. He was the orchestrator of a rebellion that had no name but plenty of firepower. As the simulation reached its chaotic climax, Marin found herself standing at the center of the storm, her avatar poised on the brink of success or complete disaster. It was a knife's edge, and she was dancing along it with her usual reckless grace. "Rilnix," she said, her tone a mixture of exasperation and determination. "You've thrown everything at us except the kitchen sink." "What's the end game here?" The Xynarch leader hesitated, its tentacles twitching with a nervous energy that belied its calm facade. "We seek an understanding." "Understanding? Really?" Marin laughed, a sound that was half madness, half recognition. "Funny way of showing it. Most people just send flowers." "Understanding through adaptation," Rilnix said slowly, the words dripping with a meaning that was both clear and terrifying. "Adaptation, huh?" Marin shook her head, a grin spreading across her face. "Well, let me tell you, buddy, humans are pretty damn good at adapting, usually in ways no one sees coming." The simulation flickered, reality bleeding into virtuality as the barriers blurred. Marin took a breath, steeling herself for the final act. If the Xynarch wanted a test of wits and wills, she'd give them one they'd never forget. In the monastery, Tevin's rebellion reached a fever pitch, the air thick with anticipation and the promise of change. They'd seen the Xynarch's hand, and now it was time to call their bluff. Together, Marin and Tevin played their parts to perfection, a symphony of chaos and defiance echoing through the simulation and the real world alike. The Xynarch had underestimated them, and that was their first mistake. As the final moments of the simulation unfolded, Marin's avatar stood triumphant amidst the ruins of the chaos, a testament to human ingenuity and stubbornness. She looked at Rilnix, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of victory and the promise of more battles to come. "You wanted a game of wits," Marin said, her voice steady and sure. "Well, I hope you enjoyed the show. Because this is just the beginning." And with that, the simulation faded to black, leaving behind a silence that spoke volumes. The Xynarch had been put on notice, and Marin Driscoll was just getting started. The simulation was a swirling mess of chaos, like a blender set to puree with the lid off. Marin stood in the middle of it all, her virtual self surveying the battlefield with the resigned look of someone who'd just realized they were the sober one at a frat party. "Well, this is a dumpster fire," she muttered to herself, dodging a stray laser beam that had the courtesy to buzz past her like an angry hornet. Factions were splitting faster than a bad hairdo in a hurricane, and resources were disappearing like cookies at a toddler's birthday party. She was getting a masterclass in futility, and the class was full of overachievers. Meanwhile, Tevin was knee-deep in data back at the monastery of Ebon Reflection, where enlightenment seemed to have taken a vacation. He looked at the monitors with the determined grimace of a man trying to rein in a particularly stubborn spreadsheet. The Xynarch had been meticulous, rewriting humanity's DNA as if it were a badly scripted soap opera. They'd done everything but add a dramatic love triangle. "Okay, Tevin," he muttered to himself, fingers racing over the keyboard like they were chased by creditors. "Let's see if we can throw a wrench in the gears of this genetic cumbaya." Back in the surreal digital landscape, Marin's team was at their wits' end, and not the good kind where you find enlightenment, more like the who left the stove on kind. Her virtual sidekick, who was as bland as tapioca but twice as loyal, popped up beside her. "Probability of success is declining," it stated in a monotone that could make a robot sound like a Shakespearean actor. "Current odds are less favorable than a snowball's chance in hell." "Thanks for the pep talk, tin can," Marin replied, rolling her eyes so hard she might have sprained something. "I'd ask for your suggestions, but I'm guessing they're about as useful as a chocolate teapot." The Xynarch, those tentacled overachievers, were already integrating human clones into their society like they were building a bureaucratic Babel. Rilnix, the tentacled ringleader of this cosmic circus, was confident to the point of arrogance. If self-satisfaction had a face, it would look like Rilnix's smug mug. Rilnix's voice slithered through the simulation, oozing superiority. "We are making great strides in mutual understanding. Great strides in being a colossal pain in my ass, more like," Marin shot back, her patience thinner than a credit card at the end of the month. "You guys must be real fun at parties." Understanding requires adaptation, Rilnix continued, missing the sarcasm with the precision of a blindfolded dart player. And adaptation is our strength. If you mean adapting to new ways of being insufferable, you're doing great, Marin replied, her grin as sharp as a laser scalpel. But don't count us out just yet. Humanity isn't quite ready to roll over and play dead. Meanwhile, Tevin was orchestrating an underground rebellion at the monastery. It was like trying to herd cats, but the cats were armed with conspiracy theories and a healthy dose of paranoia. He gathered dissenters, each more eager than the last to stick it to their overlords with a metaphorical middle finger. The monastery buzzed with whispered plans and hidden schemes, and Tevin was the reluctant conductor of this orchestra of madness. To say he was out of his depth was like saying the sun was a bit warm. "Okay, people," he called out, trying to instill some order into the chaos. "Remember, we're not here to negotiate. We're here to make sure the Xynarch's plan goes down faster than a lead balloon." Back in the simulation, Marin felt the pressure mounting like a bad headache. The Xynarch weren't slouches at turning up the heat, and she was starting to feel like a frog in a slowly boiling pot. "Marin," Tevin's voice crackled through the comms, as comforting as broken glass underfoot. "We've got a plan, but it's a long shot. Just what I love, high stakes and low odds," Marin replied, wiping virtual sweat from her avatar's brow. "Lay it on me, Doc." Tevin outlined the plan with the precision of a surgeon juggling chainsaws. It involved sabotaging the cloning pods, a task as simple as performing open-heart surgery with a spoon. "We're going to give the Xynarch a taste of their own medicine. Mess with their tech, make it dance to our tune." "Sounds like a plan so crazy it just might work," Marin said, her grin returning like an old, inappropriate friend. "Or it might blow up in our faces. Either way, I'm in." The simulation was a battlefield of shifting alliances and double crosses, and Marin felt more isolated than a pariah at a popularity contest. Every step seemed to bring a new challenge, and she felt like she was playing chess against a supercomputer with a penchant for cheating. Oddly, that was comforting. At least it meant she was in the right line of work. As her team scrambled to execute Tevin's plan, Marin couldn't help but feel the weight of their situation pressing down on her like a massive cosmic thumb. If this didn't work, the Xynarch would have a stranglehold on humanity's future, and she wasn't about to let that happen on her watch. Marin, her virtual sidekick, chimed in again, its voice as devoid of inflection as a plank of wood. "Probability of success has improved slightly. Odds now stand at marginally better than a snowball in hell. You're a real ray of sunshine, aren't you?" Marin muttered, scanning the chaotic landscape for any sign of the Xynarch's next move. "Keep me posted if the odds go up to possible or miracle." The simulation continued its relentless dance, each move calculated to test her resolve and her sanity. As the scenario reached its nerve-wracking crescendo, Marin pushed forward with all the determination of a gambler with one last chip. And then, as if on cue, the odds took a steep nosedive off a cliff. The Xynarch unleashed a final play of the game, something so unexpected it made Marin do a mental double-take. They initiated a protocol that threatened to overwrite the simulation, effectively cutting off any chance of human interference. "Rilnix, you son of a," Marin snarled, her voice a low, dangerous growl. But the Xynarch leader was nothing if not persistent, and his response was as condescending as it was predictable. "We have no sons." Marin's patience snapped like an over-tightened guitar string. "You want to win a game by nuking the board. Real classy, Rilnix." "This is not a game, Marin Driscoll. This is survival." "Of course it is," Marin spat back, her temper flaring like a supernova. "But you forgot one thing about humans, Rilnix. We're stubborn. We kick and scream and fight like hell, even when the odds are stacked against us." As the simulation teetered on the brink of collapse, Marin made a decision that would either save them or doom them. She'd reroute all available resources to sabotage the Xynarch's final gambit, a move as risky as playing hopscotch on a landmine field. With a deep breath and a stubborn set to her jaw, she hit the command and hoped for the best, or at least not the worst. The simulation shimmered, and for a moment, Marin thought she felt the universe itself holding its breath. In the monastery, Tevin worked feverishly, his hands moving like a blur over the controls. The rebels he'd gathered were executing their part of the plan with all the enthusiasm of people who'd just realized what was really at stake. "Come on, people," Tevin urged, sweat beading on his brow. "Let's show these tentacled bastards what we're made of." The air was thick with tension, each second dragging by like a lifetime. But then, slowly and almost imperceptibly, the tide began to shift. The Xynarch's control over the simulation wavered, and Marin seized the opportunity like a lioness pouncing on unsuspecting prey. "Rilnix," she called out, her voice cutting through the maelstrom like a beacon in the dark. "I think it's time you saw what stubborn really looks like." The Xynarch leader paused, its tentacles ceasing their restless movement for a fraction of a second. And what would that be, Marin Driscoll? Marin's grin was a thing of feral beauty, a promise of defiance and more than a little chaos. Us, humanity, the original stubborn bastards. And with that, she executed the final part of the plan, a calculated risk that sent the simulation into overdrive. The virtual world exploded into a kaleidoscope of data and code, a digital storm that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of their reality. Tevin's team worked in tandem, their efforts supplementing Marin's gambit with the precision of a chaotic ballet. It was a dance of defiance, a testament to humanity's refusal to be cowed by beings with tentacles and a superiority complex. As the simulation shuddered under the strain, Marin felt a thrill of triumph surge through her. They'd done it. Against all odds, against the whims of a race that saw them as little more than pawns, they'd managed to claw their way back from the brink. Reality and virtuality wavered, the lines blurring like a watercolor left out in the rain. Tevin's rebellion had struck a blow, and Marin's daring gamble had paid off in spades. The simulation stabilized, the chaos subsiding into a strange, uneasy calm. Marin found herself standing amidst the wreckage, a survivor of a battle that had pushed her further than she'd ever thought possible. "You wanted an understanding, Rilnix," she said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. "Well, here's your understanding. Humans aren't going anywhere." Rilnix's tentacles moved in a gesture that might have been grudging respect. "I see," it said slowly, as if tasting the words. "Perhaps there is more to learn from you than we anticipated." "Yeah, well, we're full of surprises," Marin replied, her grin a defiant banner against the storm. "And we don't take kindly to being messed with." And with that, the simulation faded to black, leaving behind a silence that spoke of battles fought and won. The Xynarch had been put on notice, and humanity's stubborn streak was alive and well, ready to take on whatever challenges the universe had in store. For now, it was enough. Marin Driscoll sat in the virtual cockpit of chaos, sipping on the cocktail of triumph and dread that came with barely surviving a suicidal mission. The simulation blinked back to life, recalibrating after the earlier digital firestorm. Her team was scattered across the surreal landscape, a motley crew of avatars as battered as they were determined. Xynarch had been momentarily thwarted, but their victory was about as secure as a wet tissue in a hurricane. "Well, that was a blast," Marin muttered to herself, massaging her temples. Her virtual sidekick hovered nearby, looking like a mannequin that had been given a crash course in human expression but still hadn't quite nailed it. "Congratulations, Marin," it said, its voice as sterile as a hospital corridor. "Probability of continued system stability is now at approximately 45%. Wow, 45%. I could bet my next paycheck on that," Marin said, rolling her eyes. "Got any better news, or are you just here to remind me how screwed we are? I thought you might enjoy an update on Dr. Tevin Keel's progress," the sidekick replied, missing the sarcasm like a blind man in a dart contest. "He's discovered the underlying code of the simulation." "Really? That nerd finally cracked something," Marin said, perking up. "That's got to be worth celebrating." I might even crack a smile. In the dimly lit chambers of the Monastery of Ebon Reflection, Tevin Keel was knee-deep in lines of code instead of the usual mountain of insufferable data. The rebels he had corralled were buzzing around him like caffeinated bees, each one eager to sting the Xynarch where it hurt. His fingers danced over the keyboards, eyes flicking across the screens with the intensity of a man who'd just found out his life depended on winning a particularly vicious game of Minesweeper. "All right, folks," Tevin called out, his voice echoing in the vaulted, shadow-draped room. "We've got a thread. If we pull it right, we just might unravel their whole damn tapestry." One of the rebels, an irritable techie with a permanent scowl, snorted. "You sure, Doc? Last time you said you had a breakthrough, we ended up with a meltdown." "Confidence, my friend," Tevin said, voice brimming with a bravado he didn't quite feel. "This time, it's different, I promise." The techie rolled his eyes. "If this doesn't work, I'm blaming you. Join the club," Tevin replied with a shrug. "Now, let's tear this code apart like it insulted our mothers." Meanwhile, back in the simulation, Marin was trying to piece together what was left of her sanity. The landscape was a kaleidoscope of chaos, the architecture defying logic in a way that would make Escher proud. Yet beneath the insanity, she could almost feel the hum of potential, a strategy forming amidst the madness like a diamond in the rough. "Got any more pearls of wisdom for me, sidekick?" Marin asked, glancing at her silent companion. "The odds of success remain less favorable than a snowball's chance in hell," the sidekick intoned. "But improvement is not impossible." "Wow, your optimism is contagious," Marin said dryly. "Guess it's time to roll the dice." Her plan was a tapestry of chaos theory, a masterpiece of unpredictability wrapped in a shroud of madness. With Tevin's newfound understanding of the simulation's underlying code, she could leverage chaos like a maestro conducting a symphony of discord. If the Xynarch wanted a lesson in unpredictability, she'd give them a masterclass. Marin, Tevin's voice crackled through the comms, filled with a mix of excitement and desperation. You there? We've got something. It's something all right. I'm all ears, Doc, Marin replied, leaning forward as if she could physically push herself into the sound waves. What's the miracle cure? We've found a way to inject a little anarchy into the system. Think of it as a virus, one that makes the whole thing dance to our tune, Tevin said, his voice a blend of triumph and disbelief. A chaos virus. Are you sure you didn't steal that from the plot of a bad sci-fi novel? Marin quipped, a grin tugging at her lips. Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Besides, we've got nothing else on the menu, Tevin shot back. It's either this or, well, we're screwed to put it lightly. All right, let's give it a whirl, Marin said, her grin widening into something feral and dangerous. If we're going to crash and burn, we might as well do it with style. With the plan set into motion, Marin and her team began their digital assault. The chaos virus, as Tevin had so eloquently dubbed it, spread through the simulation like wildfire. Data fragmented, reformed, and disintegrated in a dazzling display of digital pyrotechnics. The Xynarch's carefully constructed reality began to unravel, the seams fraying under the pressure of human ingenuity and sheer bloody-mindedness. Rilnix was not amused. The Xynarch leader's virtual presence flickered into view, its tentacles writhing in a dance of controlled agitation. Marin Driscoll, it said, voice dripping with disdain. What is the meaning of this? Just a little surprise party, Rilnix, Marin replied, her voice as sharp as a scalpel. Thought you might enjoy a taste of human improvisation. This chaos is unacceptable, Rilnix snarled. You are disrupting the balance. Balance schmalance, Marin retorted, crossing her arms. We're shaking things up and you better get used to it. The Xynarch leader's tentacles twitched, a motion that might have been annoyance, frustration, or both. You cannot win with such reckless tactics. Maybe, but we're sure as hell going to try, Marin said, her grin a challenge and a promise all rolled into one. Back at the monastery, Tevin and his motley crew were riding the high of their breakthrough. The chaos virus was working, injecting a much-needed dose of unpredictability into the Xynarch's sterile simulation. It was a beautiful mess, a testament to human ingenuity and stubborn defiance against all odds. Keep it up, Tevin urged, his voice a mix of command and encouragement. We're getting there slowly but surely. One of the rebels, a wiry woman with a penchant for sarcasm, looked up from her screen. Slowly being the operative word here, Doc. Can't you speed this thing up? Believe me, if I could, I would, Tevin replied with a wry smile. But hey, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? Rome didn't have a bunch of alien overlords breathing down its neck either, she shot back. Touché, Tevin conceded, returning his focus to the screens. As the virtual battlefield continued to writhe and shift, Marin felt a sense of fierce pride swell within her. They were outmatched, outgunned, and out of their minds, but they were doing it. Against all logic and reason, they were taking the fight to the Xynarch. All right, team, Marin called out, her voice a rallying cry in the digital darkness. Let's show these tentacled bastards what humans are made of. Her team responded with a chorus of determined nods and grins, avatars ready to march into the fray with all the zeal of a last stand. The Xynarch may have had the upper hand, but they had something far more unpredictable, a human penchant for chaos and the audacity to wield it. As the final push began, the virtual landscape erupted into a dazzling storm of ones and zeros, a battlefield where reality folded upon itself in a dance of destruction and creation. Marin's chaos theory was in full swing, each ripple in the digital tapestry sending shockwaves through the Xynarch's carefully laid plans. Probability of success is now increasing, her virtual sidekick informed her, its voice a flat monotone that somehow managed to convey a hint of surprise. See, that's more like it, Marin said, her spirit buoyed by the shifting tides. Keep those odds rolling in our favor. Tevin's voice crackled through the comms, a lifeline in the sea of madness. Marin, we're seeing progress on our end. The code's unraveling faster than we expected. Music to my ears, Doc, Marin replied, her grin widening into something fierce and triumphant. Let's keep it up and give Rilnix a show he'll never forget. The digital storm reached its crescendo, a maelstrom of chaos and defiance that shook the simulation to its very core. Marin and her team were a whirlwind of activity, each action a declaration of war against an enemy that had underestimated their resolve. With the Xynarch's grip on the simulation slipping, Marin seized the opportunity for one final gambit. It was a long shot, a wild card in a game where the stakes couldn't be higher. But if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was turning the impossible into the inevitable. Time to show them what real chaos looks like, Marin murmured, her voice a soft promise to the universe. And with a flick of her virtual wrist, she unleashed the full power of human unpredictability. The simulation erupted into a blaze of color and energy, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who refused to be cowed by the odds. In the monastery, Tevin watched the screens with bated breath, his heart pounding in time with the digital storm. The chaos virus had done its work, and now it was up to them to see it through. Come on, he muttered, urging the code to comply with a fervor that bordered on prayer. As the storm raged, Marin felt a thrill of exhilaration surge through her. They had done it. Against all logic and reason, they had taken the fight to the Xynarch and lived to tell the tale. In the aftermath, the simulation stabilized, the chaos settling into a strange and uneasy calm. Marin stood amidst the wreckage, a survivor of a battle that had pushed her and her team to the brink. Rilnix, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. I hope you've learned something today. The Xynarch leader's image shimmered into view, its tentacles moving in a gesture that might have been grudging respect. Indeed, Marin Driscoll, your methods are unorthodox. That's one way to put it, Marin replied with a wry grin. But if there's one thing you should know about humans, it's that we don't play by the rules. With that, the simulation faded to black, leaving behind a silence that spoke of battles fought and won. The Xynarch had been put on notice, and humanity's stubborn streak was alive and well, ready to take on whatever challenges the universe had in store. For now, it was enough. Marin Driscoll sat in her virtual cockpit, staring at the chaos she'd unleashed like a chef admiring a soufflé that somehow hadn't collapsed. If chaos had a flavor, it would be the bitter tang of coffee spiked with motor oil, an acquired taste, but damn if it didn't get the job done. Sidekick status report, she drawled, leaning back like a queen surveying her digital kingdom. It wasn't a throne, but it'd do. Simulation stability is plummeting, the digital assistant replied, monotone as ever. Probability of Xynarch comprehension of current tactics is negligible. Well, that's one for the highlight reel, Marin said, her lips quirking up with dark amusement. We might just redefine the term total collapse today. The virtual landscape looked like a cubist's fever dream, pieces folding and twisting in ways that'd make Picasso blush. The Xynarch's meticulously constructed facades were disintegrating, and Marin had a front row seat to the implosion. Tevin's anarchy in a box was doing its work, and she couldn't help but feel a thrill at the sight. Marin, came Tevin's voice, crackling through the comms with an edge of manic glee. The virus is spreading faster than a rumor at a high school reunion. We're seeing exponential decay in their neural net coherence. Glad to hear you're enjoying yourself, Doc, Marin replied, her tone dry as a desert. Just make sure you don't spike the punch too much, or we won't have a simulation to crash, noted. Tevin chuckled, clearly riding the high of their shared lunacy. As Marin watched the digital storm unfold, a notification pinged in her periphery. Her virtual sidekick piped up. The clones are exhibiting independent behavior, initiating self-awareness protocols. Oh, that's just great, Marin muttered, shaking her head. Let's just add a clone rebellion to the list. Why not? We could use some more chaos. In the simulated world, the clones were waking up from their programmed slumber, eyes blinking with the dawning realization that they were more than just meat puppets. If she squinted, Marin could see the metaphorical light bulbs flickering above their heads, bright, unsteady, and just a little bit dangerous. Tevin, what's going on with the clones? Marin asked, her voice laced with both curiosity and a touch of dread. Looks like they're going full existential crisis, Tevin replied, his voice a mix of bemusement and pride. They're questioning their purpose, their creators, the whole shebang. Sounds like a teenage rebellion, Marin mused. Except with more potential for catastrophic failure. Pretty much, Tevin agreed. But hey, if they're busy navel-gazing, maybe they'll cut us some slack. The Xynarch, on the other hand, weren't having such a good day. Their tidy plans were unraveling like the seams of a cheap suit, and Rilnix's tentacled visage flickered into view with all the grace of a bad CGI effect. Marin Driscoll, Rilnix intoned, his voice a cocktail of vexation and grudging awe. Your actions are beyond comprehension. I get that a lot, Marin said, flashing a grin that was pure cheek. It's a gift. This chaos cannot continue, Rilnix declared, the frustration simmering beneath his composed exterior. You are destabilizing the entire system. Destabilizing. Nah, I'm just giving it a much-needed facelift, Marin shot back, her tone as breezy as a spring day on a garbage planet. Plus, I'm doing you a favor. You ever think your simulation could use a little shaking up? The Xynarch leader's image wobbled, tentacles bristling as if they were ready to slap Marin upside the digital head. But before he could retort, the clones made their debut on the grand stage, their newly minted awareness fueling a surge of rebellion. Marin, Tevin's voice cut in, urgent and alive with the electricity of discovery. The clones are mobilizing. I think they're about to stage a coup. Oh good, just what we needed. An uprising to spice things up, Marin quipped, leaning forward with renewed interest. Let's see how our friends in Tentacle Land handle a bit of revolution. The clones surged through the chaos, their ranks swelling with each turn of the digital tide. They moved with the purpose of a swarm, unified not by programming, but by the shared spark of rebellion. It was a mess of their own making, and Marin took a perverse pleasure in the spectacle. In the monastery of Ebon Reflection, Tevin watched the unfolding drama with the detachment of a gambler who knows he's about to lose big, but can't help doubling down anyway. His fingers danced across the console, coaxing the chaos virus into new configurations, each iteration a fresh jab at the Xynarch's unraveling control. "Doc, how's it going on your end?" Marin asked, her voice threading through the comms like a lifeline. "Better than expected, which isn't saying much," Tevin admitted with a wry chuckle. "The Xynarch's systems are reeling, but we're not out of the woods yet. Wouldn't have it any other way," Marin said, her grin a feral slash in the dim light of her cockpit. "Keep the pressure on." "We've got them on the ropes." The simulation continued its downward spiral, a maelstrom of conflicting data and clashing ideologies. The clones, emboldened by their newfound autonomy, turned against their creators with an intensity that bordered on religious fervor. It was a spectacle of digital insurrection, and Marin was here for it. Rilnix's attempts to regain control were met with mixed success, his tentacles working overtime as he tried to wrangle the wayward threads of his creation. The Xynarch were meticulous, sure, but they weren't prepared for this level of human-inspired bedlam. "Marin Driscoll, this must cease." Rilnix's voice cut through the chaos, a desperate plea wrapped in the guise of authority. "Why stop now when we're just getting to the good part?" Marin replied, her words a taunt and a promise. "Besides, can't you see the clones are having their moment? Wouldn't want to interrupt. This is not your victory," Rilnix insisted, though the tremor in his voice belied the conviction of his words. "Maybe not, but it's one hell of a show," Marin said, crossing her arms with a sense of satisfaction that was almost palpable. As the clones' rebellion reached its zenith, the Xynarch's grip on the simulation began to slacken. Tevin, ever the opportunist, seized the moment with a hacker's precision, driving the chaos virus deeper into the system's core. "Marin," he said, his voice a thread of triumph, "we're nearing the tipping point. One final push and we might just pull this off. Then let's not waste any time," Marin replied, her tone a rallying cry. "Time to give these tentacled bastards the encore they deserve." In the virtual realm, the final act played out with all the subtlety of a bar fight in zero gravity. The clones, fueled by the fire of self-awareness, surged toward their creators with a ferocity that threatened to tear the simulation apart at the seams. It was a digital pandemonium, a glorious crescendo of chaos and defiance. And then, as if in answer to their collective cry, the simulation buckled. The Xynarch's carefully orchestrated reality fractured, splintering into a kaleidoscope of disjointed fragments. It was the end of an era and the beginning of something entirely new. In the monastery, Tevin watched the collapse with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The chaos virus had done its job, and now it was up to them to see what rose from the ashes. "Marin, the simulation's down," Tevin reported, his voice equal parts relief and exhilaration. "We did it, of course we did," Marin said, her voice a blend of pride and exhaustion. Never doubted it for a second. With the simulation in ruins, the Xynarch had no choice but to concede. Rilnix's image flickered back into view, his tentacles an unreadable mass of tangled emotion. "Marin Driscoll," he said, the words a reluctant admission of defeat, "you have demonstrated the value of human unpredictability. Glad you finally noticed," Marin replied, her grin a razor's edge of satisfaction. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before messing with us." The Xynarch leader inclined his head in what might have been respect or resignation. "We will reconsider our approach to your kind." "Good," Marin said, crossing her arms with an air of finality. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we've got a universe to get back to." As the communication cut off and the digital world faded to black, Marin leaned back in her virtual cockpit, feeling the weight of victory settle around her shoulders. They'd done it. Against all odds and logic, they'd taken the fight to the Xynarch and come out on top. "Tevin, we alive on your end?" Marin asked, her voice slipping back into the casual camaraderie of shared insanity. "Alive and kicking," Tevin replied, the grin in his voice unmistakable. "We did it, Marin. Against all odds, we actually did it." "Yep," Marin agreed, allowing herself a moment of quiet triumph. "Now let's get out of here before the universe decides to throw us another curveball." With a final glance at the remnants of the simulation, Marin powered down her virtual cockpit, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. They were battered and bruised, but they were alive, and in the end, that was what counted. In the dimly lit monastery of Ebon Reflection, the air was heavy with the smell of burnt circuits and triumph, a peculiar aroma that was equal parts victory and carbonized defeat. Marin Driscoll leaned back in her virtual cockpit, the kind of satisfied smirk plastered on her face that usually came from knowing you'd just done the impossible. "Tevin, you good?" she asked, her voice laced with the kind of casual indifference that comes only after beating the odds into submission. "Define good," replied Dr. Tevin Keel, his voice crackling over the comms. If you mean am I still breathing and not a digital smear on the floor, then yes, I'm fantastic. High standards you've got there, Doc, Marin chuckled, glancing around the virtual landscape that was now nothing more than a scattering of digital debris. Well, when your day job involves unauthorized cloning and code cracking, you learn to appreciate the small things, like not being vaporized, Tevin replied, a wry undertone in his voice that suggested he'd be grinning if his face weren't buried in a console. The simulation's collapse had left them in a precarious position, but one thing was certain, the Xynarch weren't about to ignore them. That kind of chaos and defiance tended to leave a lasting impression, much like a boot print on a sandcastle. Right, so what's next? We wait for the tentacle brigade to come calling, Marin asked, stretching her limbs as though shaking off the residual tension of combat. Something like that, but maybe with less calling and more negotiating, Tevin mused, his fingers flicking across his console like a pianist on a caffeine bender. After all, it's not every day you disrupt an entire simulation with a good old-fashioned human touch. Yeah, they probably want to figure out just how we managed to jam a wrench in their well-oiled machine, Marin said, her voice rich with satisfaction. Maybe even get a little collaboration going. Collaboration? With the Xynarch, Tevin snorted. That's like inviting a starving wolf to your dinner party and hoping it'll stick to salad. True, but it's the only way forward, Marin shrugged, knowing that peace and progress often took the form of the least bad option. We've shown them what unpredictability can do. Maybe it's time to see if they can handle a bit of inspired insanity. Their musings were interrupted by the reappearance of Rilnix's image, flickering into view with all the charisma of a half-finished hologram. Tentacles at half-mast, he looked every inch the defeated warlord pretending to be a diplomat. Marin Driscoll, Dr. Tevin Keel, Rilnix intoned, his voice carrying a resigned weight. It appears we underestimated the human capacity for disorder. Thanks, we do try, Marin replied, her tone flippant enough to strip paint. Turns out chaos is kind of our thing. Indeed, Rilnix acknowledged, a tentacle scratching what might have been his chin or an equivalent alien feature. In light of recent developments, the Xynarch are prepared to discuss terms of coexistence. Terms? Tevin asked, eyebrows raising into his hairline. You mean you want to play nice after all that? Not exactly. More like a mutual benefit arrangement, Rilnix replied, his tone suggesting he was swallowing a particularly large and bitter pill. We propose utilizing human unpredictability as a counterbalance to our structured systems. Marin and Tevin exchanged a glance, the kind of look shared by people who've just been offered a chance to pet a tiger on a very short leash. So you're saying you want us to keep being weirdo wildcards, but in a way that doesn't end with galaxies imploding? Marin asked, making sure she got the gist of the offer. In layman's terms, yes, Rilnix admitted, tentacles twitching like he was conducting an orchestra of discomfort. Your ability to disrupt, while inconvenient, has shown potential for creative synergy. Well, that's one way to put it, Tevin snickered, leaning back in his chair. I prefer to think of it as organized chaos with a side of accidental genius. Still, a partnership might be the best way to keep both our kinds from staging a sequel to the great simulation implosion, Marin added, crossing her arms with the air of someone who'd just struck a particularly dodgy deal with a used starship salesman. The Xynarch leader inclined his head in a gesture of agreement, or possibly an attempt to keep his balance. One could never tell with all those wriggling appendages. Then let us proceed with establishing parameters for this collaboration. With all the enthusiasm of a cat facing bath time, Marin and Tevin set about the thankless task of negotiating peace with their erstwhile adversaries. It was like trying to construct a bridge using only marshmallows and a vague sense of optimism, but somehow they managed to hammer out a framework that didn't immediately collapse into a heap of bad intentions. The Monastery of Ebon Reflection, once a bastion of clandestine scheming and questionable moral decisions, was repurposed as a center for peaceful research. The Xynarch, with all their geometric impossibilities and attention to detail, provided the kind of technological support that turned human chaos into an art form. Gotta hand it to them, Marin said, watching a group of human and Xynarch scientists fiddle with a holographic interface. They know how to put on a show. Yeah, turns out when you add a splash of chaos to their order, you get something pretty damn groundbreaking, Tevin replied, a sense of satisfaction warming his tone. Who'd have thought existential crises would pave the way for galactic cooperation? Life's weird like that, Marin shrugged, the kind of shrug that had been honed through years of dealing with the universe's myriad peculiarities. You spend all your time trying to tear each other apart, then suddenly you're best buds over a shared love of destabilizing the status quo. The clones, too, had found a place in this brave new world. No longer just digital constructs, they'd taken on roles within the research teams, their newfound self-awareness making them invaluable partners in innovation. It was a twist that nobody, especially not Marin, had seen coming. "Hey, look at that," Tevin said, nodding toward a group of clones engaged in a spirited debate with their Xynarch counterparts. "Who knew rebellion could be so productive? Maybe we should start a revolution more often," Marin quipped, her grin sharp enough to cut through the irony. "Seems to be working out for us." In the aftermath of the simulation's collapse, humanity had gained a newfound respect in the galaxy. The Xynarch, once viewed as untouchable overlords, now recognized the value in their unpredictable human neighbors, not as a threat, but as allies who brought a fresh perspective to the stodgy business of galactic politics. As the days turned into weeks, and the initial chaos settled into a more manageable form of anarchy, Marin found herself reflecting on the peculiar nature of their victory. It wasn't just about beating the odds or taking down a seemingly invincible foe. No, it was about embracing the power of the irrational, the beauty of imperfection, and the simple truth that sometimes you just had to let things fall apart to see what emerged from the rubble. "Funny, isn't it?" Marin mused one evening, watching the stars flicker like distant campfires through the monastery's newly installed skylight. "We spend all this time trying to make sense of the universe, and in the end, it's the nonsense that saves us." "Yeah, you could say that," Tevin replied, his tone contemplative as he joined her in stargazing. "I guess it's true what they say. Sometimes you've just got to embrace the chaos and see where it takes you." "Cheers to that," Marin said, raising an imaginary toast to all the improbable moments that had led them here. In the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about recognizing the value of unpredictability, of letting go of rigid structures in favor of something messier, but infinitely more satisfying. It was about understanding that sometimes the best way to solve a problem was to embrace the very chaos that had created it. "You know," Marin said, a wry smile tugging at her lips, "I think we just accidentally invented peace." Tevin laughed, the sound rich with the kind of reckless optimism that had seen them through the darkest of days. "Well, if that's the case, then maybe humanity's got a shot after all." As the stars continued their slow dance across the velvet tapestry of space, Marin and Tevin sat in companionable silence, content in the knowledge that they'd managed to turn a potential catastrophe into a chance for something better. It wasn't perfect, but then again, neither were they. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what made it work.